On the sunny morning that illuminated the imposing Montenegro mansion, Lucia Perez took a deep breath before entering. It was her first day of work, and she felt her heart racing. She needed this job not only to support her ailing mother, but also to keep dreaming of a better future. As she passed through the ornate iron gates, she found herself in a world of the rich and powerful, a world that seemed so distant from her simple reality. The house was a true palace. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting sunlight and creating sparkles that danced across the marble hallways. Lucia felt small in the face of such grandeur, yet there was a determination in her gaze. She knew she had to give her best, and that meant learning to navigate the rules and elegance that the mansion demanded. As she walked through the hallways, still a bit lost, holding a bucket and cleaning cloth, her eyes were attentive to every detail. Everything seemed perfect, untouched, as if this place were a fairy tale setting. Suddenly, as she turned a corner, she collided with something, or rather, someone. The impact made her let out a slight gasp of surprise, and the bucket fell from her hands. She looked up and froze. Standing before her was Alejandro Montenegro, the owner of it all, a tall, elegant man in a perfectly tailored suit with a cold, intense expression. His dark eyes looked at her as if trying to read every hidden thought within her. For a moment, Lucia felt time stand still. Alejandro's gaze was enigmatic, almost indecipherable, and his face showed neither a smile nor anger. He simply looked at her, as if trying to uncover a mystery she herself didn't know. Lucia, not knowing what to do, lowered her head, embarrassed and blushing. "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Her heart was racing, not only from the fright, but also from his imposing presence, which made her feel so small and, at the same time, so vulnerable. Alejandro continued observing her for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. He was used to everyone around him obeying his orders without hesitation. But this young woman, with her shy and humble attitude, had something different, something that made his heart, until then accustomed to the coldness of business, beat a bit stronger. Without saying a word, he bent down slowly, picked up the bucket, and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Lucia felt a shiver run through her body. Alejandro broke the silence with a deep, serious voice. "Be more careful next time." But before walking away, their eyes met once more, and there was something there that neither of them could explain. It was as if both knew, without words, that this encounter was no mere coincidence. Something had changed in that instant, and their lives would never be the same. As Alejandro walked away, Lucia stood watching his elegant figure disappear down the hall. She didn't know what to think, but one thing was certain. That mansion now had a new meaning for her, and deep in her soul, something told her that the cold and distant man was hiding much more than he let on. The days at the Montenegro mansion passed in a sequence of careful and elegant routines. Lucia worked tirelessly, always with a shy smile on her face. Despite the fatigue she bore, she strove to complete her tasks perfectly because she knew this job was her chance to secure her mother's treatment. Her dedication was admired by many, but what she didn't know was that someone was watching her closely, day after day. Alejandro, hidden behind his facade of coldness and power. Montenegro began to notice every gesture of Lucia. He saw her tidying rooms, setting tables, always with that serene expression and a hopeful gleam in her eyes. The way she cared for everything with such dedication and warmth was something Alejandro couldn't understand. Accustomed to the world of business and appearances, he couldn't fathom how someone could give so much without expecting anything in return. Unconsciously, he began looking for her in the hallways, noticing when she entered and left, as if his eyes wanted to capture every detail of her. One morning, Alejandro was in the garden, pretending to read some documents while watching Lucia from afar as she watered the flowers. He noticed how she softly spoke to the plants, as if they could hear her words, and for a brief moment, he felt a strange sense of peace, something he hadn't experienced in years. But along with that peace came doubt and unease. How can I feel this way? She's just an employee. This is ridiculous, he murmured to himself, almost irritated by his own thoughts. The feelings growing inside him were conflicted. He, who always had everything under control, now felt vulnerable to Lucia's simplicity, and that infuriated him. How could someone so powerful and respected be affected by a humble young woman who had nothing to offer beyond her kindness? Alejandro began questioning himself, fighting against what he felt. I'm a Montenegro. This is impossible, a mistake. Yet the more he tried to convince himself it was a mistake, the more his eyes sought her. To quell the attraction that seemed only to grow stronger, Alejandro decided to act with coldness. He believed that if he treated Lucia distantly and rigidly, his feelings would disappear. He began to ignore her, giving short, dry orders without even looking her in the eyes. When he saw her in the hallways, he avoided speaking to her and forced himself to think of other things. If he happened to catch her smiling, he quickly looked away, as if it were a danger he didn't want to face. Lucia, on the other hand, sensed the change. She couldn't understand why Mr. Alejandro, who had been polite and cordial at first, now seemed to treat her presence as something bothersome. The intense glances he used to give her had turned brief and distant, but even so, there was something in his eyes that he couldn't hide. Over time, Lucia noticed that behind that coldness, there was a silent storm. It was in moments like those when Alejandro was alone in his office, lost in thought, that he would relive the moments he'd watched her smile, filling him with a mix of pleasure and agony. How can I be swayed by such a ridiculous illusion? He would mutter to himself, clenching his fists in frustration. She's just an employee, nothing more. But despite all his efforts to deny it, the reality was clear. Alejandro Montenegro, the man who always thought he controlled everything, was losing control of himself. As the weeks passed at the Montenegro mansion, a new atmosphere settled in. Alejandro, still struggling with his own feelings, started finding excuses to cross paths with Lucia, almost without realizing it. Every day, he found a reason to ask her a simple question or share a brief moment. They exchanged quick glances, discreet smiles, as if their hearts wanted to say what words couldn't express. One afternoon, as Lucia watered the garden flowers, Alejandro approached her silently and began asking her about her family, about her life before working at the mansion. Initially hesitant, Lucia slowly opened up, telling him about her mother, the struggles they faced, and how she fought every day to make ends meet and pay for her mother's treatment. Alejandro listened intently, his usually cold eyes showing a warmth that revealed his admiration for her strength. For the first time in years, he wasn't pretending interest. He genuinely wanted to know her. But as Alejandro grew closer to Lucia, someone else was watching his every move. Valeria, a wealthy and influential woman, a lifelong friend of the Montenegro family, had developed an obsession with Alejandro. She saw him as a trophy, a conquest that had to be hers, and couldn't stand the thought of him with anyone else, especially someone as simple as Lucia. Valeria soon noticed something had changed, that Alejandro's eyes no longer sought her out, and this filled her with hatred. Determined to prevent the millionaire from falling in love with the servant, Valeria began investigating Lucia's life using her influence and contacts. It didn't take her long to discover Lucia's carefully guarded secret. Her mother was gravely ill, and the treatment costs were high. That was when Valeria saw her chance to separate them and crush any possibility of Lucia getting close to Alejandro. One evening, as Lucia was leaving the mansion, Valeria was waiting outside, like a snake ready to strike. "We need to talk," she said with a calculated smile as she approached Lucia. Surprised and slightly frightened, Lucia had no choice but to listen. Valeria then revealed that she knew everything about Lucia's mother's condition and made her an offer that froze Lucia's heart. "I can pay for your mother's entire treatment. Money is no issue for me, but in return, you must stay away from Alejandro. Don't look at him again. Don't speak to him." Lucia felt tears well up in her eyes. Her heart shrank at the thought of losing Alejandro. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't let her mother suffer. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. Valeria, cold and cruel, responded, "Because Alejandro is mine, and you're nothing but a temporary distraction for him. Do you really think someone like him would choose you? Take the money, do what's right for your mother, and disappear from his life." The offer was poison wrapped in promises of hope. Lucia knew that if she accepted, she would shatter her own heart. But she also knew she couldn't sacrifice her mother's life for a love that seemed impossible. Desperate, and with no other choice, she made the hardest decision of her life. The next day, when she saw Alejandro, she didn't smile as she usually did. Her eyes were downcast, her voice trembling. "I need some time, Mr. Montenegro. I need distance," she said, forcing the words out. Alejandro was confused, surprised. "What happened?" "I thought that." But Lucia didn't let him finish the sentence. "Nothing happened, sir. I just need space." And with those words, she turned and walked away, leaving Alejandro lost and wondering what had gone wrong. Valeria, watching from afar, smiled, satisfied. Her plan had worked. She had managed to push Lucia away and believed Alejandro would now be hers. But what Valeria hadn't counted on was that true love cannot be destroyed by lies and manipulation. Though Lucia was physically distant from Alejandro, her heart still beat for him, and the pain of pretending indifference was greater than any sacrifice. Alejandro, for his part, began to feel that something didn't add up, and as the stubborn man he was, he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth behind Lucia's withdrawal. Lucia was devastated. Her decision to accept Valeria's blackmail weighed like a stone in her chest. She knew it was the only way to secure her mother's treatment. That night, she cried alone, hiding her tears so as not to alarm the woman sleeping in the next room. The pain of giving up Alejandro was immense, like tearing away a part of herself. But she resolved to do whatever it took, even if it meant breaking her own heart. The next day, Lucia arrived at the mansion with a different expression. She knew she would have to face Alejandro and put into practice the lie she had been forced to tell. Every step she took felt as if she were walking toward a precipice. But she steeled herself to be strong. Alejandro found her in the hallways, and for a brief moment, his eyes lit up at the sight of her, though he had no idea that light was about to be extinguished. "Lucia," he said, approaching her. "We need to talk. What's going on? Why are you avoiding me?" Alejandro's voice was full of confusion and a touch of desperation. He couldn't understand how someone who seemed so close to him could suddenly withdraw without explanation. Lucia swallowed, her heart urging her to tell him the truth, to explain the reason behind her distancing. But the image of her fragile, sick mother came to mind, giving her the strength to say what she had to say. "There's nothing to explain, Mr. Montenegro," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I never should have gotten close to you. We're from different worlds, and it could never work." Alejandro stood stunned, feeling as if the ground had fallen away beneath him. "Is that what you think?" He took a step back, as if to protect himself from the sharpness of her words. "After everything, that's how you treat me?" The pain was visible in his eyes, but Lucia forced an indifferent expression, though inside, she was falling apart. "Yes," she lied, "I never should have let this go so far." It was a blow Alejandro hadn't expected. He felt betrayed, as if everything they had shared had been a lie. Without knowing about Valeria's blackmail, he couldn't understand why. Lucia acted that way. Her heart, which she had allowed to open, closed again with a coldness she knew well. "If that's what you want," Alejandro said bitterly, "then we're finished." With those words, he turned and walked away, leaving Lucia behind with silent tears streaming down her face. Meanwhile, Valeria watched everything from afar, a satisfied smile on her face. Her plan had worked perfectly. She had managed to separate them, and now Alejandro was alone and vulnerable, just as she wanted. Valeria knew Alejandro wouldn't easily fall into her arms, but she had at least managed to remove Lucia from his life, which was a victory for her, at least for the moment. But what Valeria couldn't see was the battle going on inside Lucia. After watching Alejandro walk away, Lucia felt as if the world had lost all its color. She returned home, embraced her mother, and cried like she had never cried before. The sacrifice she had made weighed heavily on her soul, and the guilt for lying to Alejandro consumed her. "I love you, Alejandro," she whispered alone in her room, as if he could somehow hear her words and as if they would somehow reach him. Alejandro, in turn, locked himself in his office, alone with his thoughts and a bottle of whiskey. He tried to convince himself that it was for the best, that Lucia had shown her true colors, and that he needed to forget her. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. Every memory, every smile, every glance they shared returned to his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the story, something he was missing. Thus, two broken hearts tried to move on, each fighting their own internal battle. Lucia was torn between love and duty, and Alejandro was trapped in his own pain and confusion. Valeria, believing she had won, was unaware that she had only ignited a spark that would eventually turn against her. For true love, even wounded, never disappears. It only waits for the right moment to find its way back. Fate had its own ways of revealing the truth. Alejandro, still bitter from Lucia's supposed betrayal, tried to focus on his business, but his mind kept drifting back to her. Every corner of the mansion, every scent in the air, reminded him of her. He felt lost, as if a part of himself had been torn away. Yet he tried to push forward, convinced that Lucia had lied and played with his feelings. But everything changed one unexpected afternoon. Alejandro was in the city on business matters when he overheard a conversation that would change everything. He was in an upscale cafe, waiting for a client, when two women at the next table started talking about a young woman they knew. "Did you hear what that Valeria did?" whispered one of them. "She blackmailed poor Lucia to make her leave Alejandro. She used Lucia's mother's illness to force her to break things off with him. Can you imagine having to choose between saving your mother or being with the love of your life?" Alejandro froze. His hands shook, and he nearly dropped the coffee cup he was holding. Every word hit him like a direct blow to his heart. It was as if the world around him had gone silent, and all he could hear were those terrible words. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Valeria had done that. She had manipulated Lucia, used her deepest pain to drive her away from him. Suddenly, all the pieces fell into place, and he felt foolish for not realizing it sooner. He stood up, left the cafe without even waiting for his client, and drove back to the mansion with his heart pounding and a whirlwind of emotions. Pain, anger, regret. He had doubted Lucia. He had abandoned her when she needed him, all because of a cruel lie. Alejandro knew he had to see her. He had to hear the truth directly from her. When he arrived at the mansion, he learned that Lucia was in the garden. He went there, and when he saw her, his heart tightened. She was standing with her back to him, tending to the flowers, unaware of his presence until he was very close. Lucia turned and, upon seeing Alejandro, her eyes widened in surprise and fear. She knew she didn't have the strength to face another wave of pain. "Alejandro, what are you doing here?" she asked, trying to stay calm, though her voice betrayed her anxiety. He didn't respond immediately. He just looked at her for a moment, trying to control the storm of feelings that brewed within him. "I know the truth, Lucia," he finally said, his voice laden with emotion. "I know what she did." His words struck like lightning. Lucia stood frozen, her eyes wide open as she felt tears begin to flow. "What do you mean?" she stammered, trying to hide behind one last barrier of defense. Alejandro took a step forward, pain and anger mixed in his eyes. "Why did you do it, Lucia? Why did you lie to me? Why did you push me away? I need to know." Lucia could no longer hold back her tears. All the suffering, all the anguish she had kept hidden finally surfaced. "I lied because I love you," she answered, her voice broken by sobs, "and because I couldn't live knowing my mother died because of me. Valeria knew I had no money for her treatment. She offered the one thing I desperately needed in exchange for leaving you. I had no choice, Alejandro." Alejandro felt a knot in his chest, a pain almost physical, upon hearing Lucia's confession. He stepped closer, holding her face in his hands, forcing her to look him in the eyes. "Do you think I would care about that? That I would let your mother suffer? That I would let you suffer alone? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe that what we shared meant nothing to you?" His voice was almost pleading, and Lucia saw tears in his eyes, something she had never seen before. "Because I was afraid," she said, her eyes shining with both pain and love. "Afraid of losing my mother, afraid of losing you. And I lost both." Alejandro felt his heart break at her words. He had never imagined that Lucia's love for him was so deep that she was willing to sacrifice herself that way. Without saying another word, Alejandro pulled her to him and held her tightly, as if he could protect her from all the suffering she had endured. "I should never have doubted you," he whispered in her ear. "I should never have let you face this alone. But now I know the truth, and I'm going to fight for you, for us." Lucia let herself be enveloped in his embrace, finally feeling a relief she hadn't felt in a long time. But she knew the battle wasn't over yet. Valeria was still there, still wielding power over the situation. But in that moment, the only thing that mattered was that Alejandro believed in her, and that gave Lucia the courage she thought she had lost. Alejandro knew he had to confront Valeria, to end the lies and manipulation she had used to drive them apart. He found her in her luxurious penthouse, surrounded by everything money could buy, but with a cold, calculating look that made it clear she had no intention of surrendering easily. When Alejandro entered, Valeria tried to smile, but she quickly realized that he knew everything. "Alejandro, what a surprise," she began, trying to keep her composure. "What brings you here?" But Alejandro wasn't interested in games. He looked at her intently, his expression firm, his eyes burning with contained fury. "I know everything, Valeria. I know what you did to Lucia. I know how you blackmailed her, how you forced her to push me away. And it ends now." Valeria remained calm, but her eyes betrayed the fear starting to grow inside her. "Do you really think you can trust a girl like Lucia? She's just a servant, Alejandro. She doesn't belong in your world." Her voice was cold, almost venomous, as she tried to undermine his determination. But Alejandro didn't waver. "And you think you can keep manipulating everyone around you to get what you want? That shows how little you understand about what it means to truly love someone." His words struck Valeria like a knife, but she still had one last card up her sleeve. In a desperate move, she tried to deliver what she thought would be the final blow. "You want to be with her, Alejandro? Go ahead. But remember, she'll always have her mother's debt weighing on her shoulders, and when she needs more help, she'll be the first to come running to you, begging." Alejandro took a deep breath, anger building inside him, but he kept his composure. "That's what you don't understand. Valeria, I help Lucia because I love her, not because I expect something in return. I'm not like you." In a firm tone, he added, "And that's why I'm here, to make it clear that your blackmail ends now. You will stop trying to separate us. And if you dare to harm Lucia or her mother again, you will face the consequences." Valeria realized she had lost. Alejandro was resolute, and nothing she could say or do would change that. Her confident facade finally crumbled, revealing the anger and resentment she had tried to hide. "Do you really think she can make you happy?" she shouted, losing her composure. "She's nothing but a nobody." Alejandro stepped forward, looking her directly in the eyes. "She's everything you'll never be, Valeria. She's genuine, brave, and has a heart that's not corrupted by power or money. That's why I choose her, today and always." Leaving Valeria behind, defeated and furious, Alejandro went directly to Lucia's home. He knew the road wouldn't be easy, that the damage Valeria had caused would leave scars, but he was willing to fight for their love and to redeem himself for the mistakes he'd made. When he arrived, he found her in the small garden where she used to tend to the flowers to calm her mind. Seeing him, Lucia looked surprised and hesitant, fearing that new difficulties might lie ahead. "Alejandro, what are you doing here? Enjoying our content? Don't miss out. Subscribe to our channel now to stay updated with all our latest videos, tips, and exclusive insights. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment. Join our community today